Welcome to FreightWaves Today. Julie, it is July 6th.
Yep.
Did you have a fantastic 4th?
We did, yeah. It was good to have some time away last week with the family, and the 4th.
You went to Green Bay, another great freight city.
We did. We went to Green Bay, and then we went to northern Wisconsin for a while, and took the kids fishing, and
nice.
We went to a 4th of July parade and did all of the woodsy things that I try to be really brave about and act cool about so my kids can enjoy it, and it was good.
Well, Green Bay is a great freight town. We're actually going to be doing a live show up there in September.
Yeah.
So we're going to Green Bay. Excited about that. So much is happening in freight. The interesting thing is that tender projections dropped, and I think that's really related to shippers starting to. One of the things that David Spencer said last week is that shippers are becoming aware of really that this is not a temporary phenomenon. There's a lot of denialism, if you will, or lack of acceptance about the market being so tight earlier this year. But that seems to have gone, and now when shippers look at the second half, particularly retailers, they've got to really plan for contingencies. They've got to think about the fact that if they don't have new contract rates, trucks may not show up.
Yeah, so you think tender rejections are kind of holding steady or dipping very, very slightly because more freight.
I mean, we're down 50 basis points, 17 and a half down to...
being accepted because those rates are rising, finally?
I think what's happening is that shippers are starting... I think over the July 4th week, I thought we would have hit 20%. I was a little surprised that it cooled off. Spot rates didn't, and we'll get into this to a second. Spot rates actually increased overnight, and they're at record highs. But I think that's just anytime you have a holiday, you do see those last minute, I need to move it, I'm willing to pay. David Spencer, again, from Live Logistics, he was on FreightWaves Today last week, talked about the fact that shippers have been stacking freight this week. So I think a lot of shippers didn't want it over the long weekend. Just, you have security issues, perhaps you have weather, it was real hot. I think a lot of shippers took off.
Yeah.
What's that?
And stormy. There were lots of storms across the country for the weekend. So
that's right. In fact, New Jersey, I think parts of New Jersey are still out of power.
Flooding, yeah.
So really, I think a lot of it is just this sort of July 4th holiday is sort of frozen a little bit of the market. And but this week, I think will be a good week for everybody.
Yeah, I think we'll see. I hope it is. In my past, July always created sort of a lull for us and into August. Well, it shouldn't always be the case in July, right? You would think beverage, all of that, back to school.
How much of it was the lull was related to drivers off duty? Because that's always a big piece of it versus demand.
So you would think if drivers off duty you would be rejecting more freight because you could accept less freight. And that was not the case for us in my career historically.
So July is a relatively soft month. I always knew in the freight calendar, it was January, February, and July were always the most difficult months. But again, some of that's related to drivers going off duty. You still have beverage that's shipping. Absolutely. But construction's starting to cool off. We even see it in the flatbed data that you are seeing some slowdown in flatbed demand, flatbed rejections, largely because I think a lot of the construction for AI data centers probably happened earlier in the year, and that seems to be cooling.
And then they're not quite ready for fitting it out yet, which will hopefully create a pop in van freight.
Yeah, for sure. We have some great headlines today. Let's get into it.
We kick things off with a major guilty plea in a stunning embezzlement case that rocked a Texas freight brokerage. Mitchell David Slentz, a 34-year-old former controller for Austin Freight Systems, pleaded guilty June 29th to federal wire fraud charges after prosecutors accused him of embezzling more than $3.2 million from the company. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Texas, Slentz fraudulently misappropriated company funds between October 2023 and March 2025, completing 147 payments totaling approximately $3,277,937 and depositing the money into his personal bank accounts. Financial analysis revealed deposits and winnings exceeding $1 million through an online gambling platform, while prosecutors also alleged Slentz paid more than $58,000 toward student loan debt using stolen funds. Despite the massive theft, Austin Freight Systems confirmed it remains financially sound and continues to operate in a business-as-usual fashion. Meanwhile, in Washington, a bipartisan cargo theft bill is sparking intense debate over whether documented losses justify expanding federal enforcement. The Combating Organized Retail Crime Act, known as CORCA, passed the House of Representatives by a 348-60 vote in May and now awaits action in the U.S. Senate. The legislation would create an organized retail and supply chain crime coordination center within Homeland Security investigations to coordinate investigations involving organized retail crime and organized supply chain crime. Critics argue documented cargo theft remains a small percentage of freight moved across North America each year, while supporters counter that the current reporting system captures only a fraction of crimes occurring nationwide. Scott Cornell, chair of TAPA Americas and chief risk officer at SPG Cargo and Logistics, estimates CargoNet captures roughly 1 in every 10 full truckload cargo thefts, describing the reports as an effective sample size that establishes trends rather than a complete national count. Finally, cargo theft across Mexico is declining, but the violence targeting truck drivers has turned brutally deadly. According to Mexico's Executive Secretariat of the National Public Security System, authorities opened 2,099 cargo theft investigations between January and May, down 21% from 2,653 investigations during the same period in 2025. However, Mexico's National Freight Chamber of Commerce, known as Canacar, reports that 14 truck drivers have been killed in highway attacks so far in 2026, highlighting what the organization describes as a shift toward more aggressive tactics by criminal groups. Canacar officials say robbers are increasingly using firearms and opening fire on truck drivers rather than waiting for vehicles to stop voluntarily. The state of Mexico remained the country's largest cargo theft hotspot, recording 1,074 investigations during the first 5 months of 2026, while the Veracruz-Puebla corridor has been identified as one of the nation's most dangerous freight routes.
Julie, it feels like a little bit of a war zone out there.
I know. So some interesting headlines. We'll talk about the embezzlement a little bit later in our highway segment. But yes, I want to talk about the violence in Mexico and certainly about Corca too. But rough day for Mexico today after losing the men's team last night at home. So,
but I think it's like the whole chaos that is happening in Mexico. Does that put risk for shippers in terms of depending on Mexico when you have organized crime that's out attacking truck drivers?
Well, yes, because it's also going to not just the risk for shippers in the actual risk of the drivers and the being injured and the cargo being stolen, but the rates, as the risk goes up,
the rates
are going to go up, right?
Sure.
Because it's going to be harder to entice drivers to do that, and certainly U.S.-based drivers versus maybe not with Mexican carriers. I'm not sure.
Now, I know like 30 years ago when I was in freight, we had a situation where we were providing, like there was, I call it small bribes, micro bribes, like cash. The drivers with Mexican carriers, the drivers would carry money for the local police to basically pay them off, because if you didn't, you could be detained. I mean, look, I'm not condoning it, but that's what you have to do in some cases.
I think it's interesting that they mentioned that down in the state of Mexico, so near to like Mexico City, is where it's become more violent. And I'm wondering if maybe closer to the border where there is more cross-border, the Monterey area, if that's cleaned up, because
I don't think
overall.
So. I mean,
but
if you've seen the cartels, they seem to be operating across the border. I mean, in fact, there have been situations where there was that whole situation about a year ago where there were conversations about them sending drones over the border and things like that. So the cartels control there are entire states inside of Mexico where the cartels are effectively in control. I think Juarez is one of those, wherever, the town or the state that Juarez is in. You see it down the coast in Baja California as well. I mean, that's the issue, is that the cartels have a lot of power, and it does de-risk the potential reindustrialization supply chain for Mexico, because you have the issue with the cartels. It's effectively a war zone.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it. And to me, it makes logical sense that it is becoming more violent, and that I think the headline noted that we're not waiting for them to stop. They're shooting while in transit, maybe. And there aren't hours of service regulations in Mexico, right? So
I mean, that's a good question. I haven't dug too deep into the hour, but if I'm a driver, I'm
not stopping.
I'm driving right through. I mean, you have this in the United States too, where there are carjackings, hijackings of trucks. This happens episodically in certain cities. The drivers are basically instructed to just keep going and avoid those areas, because you're opening yourself up to potential risk, particularly if you have a high value truckload. I think we saw it in places like Miami, where if you're hauling cell phones, these are are very targeted truckload shipments. Again, the sophistication of the criminals have become so much more what they call strategic. It's less violent, perhaps, in parts of the United States than it was, where now a lot of the criminal syndicates have resorted to things like double brokering fraud, identity theft, that we're going to get into. These are all issues that have been pervasive. It's a little bit different, but in Mexico, it feels like it's much more your traditional Hollywood-style violence.
Well, we don't have a lot of time, but Corca, give us your thoughts on that. And if, this cargo theft bill, which is bipartisan, it's supported by both parties, it really would just create more crime coordination through Homeland Security.
I think the issue right now is that and we had in our fraud summit, we had the FBI in attendance, but the issue right now is if you have, and this has been this way for 20, at least since I've been in the freight business, if you had a truckload stolen, the local police don't really consider it their problem. So you really need the feds involved, and the feds don't typically get involved unless the crime is so big and so substantial that it merits the kind of investigation. Because really what they want to do is one truckload stolen is just not that interesting. They want to go after the big headlines where we're talking millions of dollars. And we've, it feels like every single day we're talking millions of dollars in cargo theft. A load that's stolen or a set of loads that are stolen is in the millions. That's what the FBI really wants to focus on. So unless you hit those thresholds, they just aren't really investigating it. Corca will provide funding. This is something that the railroads, trains, we had Bill Stevens on, who's done this multiple part studies. A fascinating article on trains.com about the fact that these criminal groups in Southern California are jumping on the trains. And they're literally, as the train's moving, opening up the doors and throwing Amazon boxes out, which seems very ridiculous. It seems very, do you remember Fast and Furious?
Yeah, I was thinking about that more than once today with these headlines, yes.
At the time Fast and Furious came out, I remember watching it and be like, that doesn't happen in real life. That's not how it works. That does feel like we've reached that point. And I think if you're a criminal, you start to become so aware of how valuable these properties are. I mean, you can go rob a bank. You're not going to get away with that probably. And you may get away with, $50,000, $75,000 at best. That's very traceable. And you're going to have every state agency and federal agency after you. Still a truck, that's far more lucrative. So it's a big story, and it's going to continue to pile up, and we're going to continue to cover it. Unfortunately, it does continue to feed the news cycle.
Well, yeah, it's because it's rampant and it's happening everywhere.
It's happening everywhere, and it's a major issue. Let's get to our first guest. We have her. Sorry, it is Monday.
It's such a Monday.
Good to see you. We have Jesús Guerra. He is the president of Pilot Energy down in Houston. Jesús, welcome to FreightWaves Today.
Thank you for having me. Craig. Good to see you, Julie.
Well, we're a lot to talk about. Obviously, energy has been top of mind. Energy is one of these stories that we've covered in FreightWaves where it's sort of, a lot of people take it for granted, sort of aren't thinking a lot about it during times when fuel prices are low. And then all of a sudden it becomes the most important conversation in freight. You live it and breathe it every day. So this is something that's top of your mind. For most of our audience, they don't think about it until they have to think about it. And over the last couple of months, it's been top of mind. What are you seeing right now in the oil markets? We've seen WTI drop to $69 a barrel. Obviously, that's good for consumers, providing some relief for motor carriers. What are your thoughts sort of on the state of oil today?
My thoughts on the state of oil, that is volatile. As if we would rewind 30, 60 days, right, it's probably the most volatile times I've ever seen in my career. Through diplomatic policy or diplomacy, I would say we're in a stable period now, but the physical markets here in the U.S., in particular to diesel, i.e. Our truck drivers' one of the largest expenses, are going to be volatile. We're fortunate to be in the United States of America with a great energy infrastructure, but we're very, very dependent on our domestic supply today. And we feel at Pilot that adding additional opportunities, i.e. renewable fuels, biodiesel specifically, could help offset some of those costs.
Jesús, I'd like to ask about the SEED Act. Can you tell us,
Sure.
For viewers who don't know what it is, what is it? What does it actually do? What could it accomplish?
In simple terms, the SEED Act reinstates 40A, the federal blender's tax credit that the industry has known and had a lot of success with for 20 years. It expired at the end of 2024, And with current support today, the SEED Act would bring that back, effective here in 2026, and it would go through 2029. Diesel is the largest expense, as I mentioned earlier, of truck drivers. Adding biodiesel to that fuel supply would ultimately help reduce that cost and ultimately reduce some of that volatility that Craig mentioned earlier.
So is the concept that by blending biodiesel in, you would get a credit for that fuel?
Sure. I should say, and I should have said it in the previous question, the federal blender's tax credit, 40A, gives $1 tax credit for every gallon of biodiesel that's blended into diesel. Very simple, transparent. The industry knows it, had a lot of success with it. What it effectively do would give $1 tax credit at the point of blend, which is the best place for consumers to benefit. So it would encourage domestic production of biodiesel, i.e. farmers would benefit, truck drivers would pay less for fuel, everybody would benefit from that. We're having good success with freight, but let's lower cost. And ultimately the cost of goods are reduced, i.e. as American consumers, we pay less.
So whenever it expired prior, you said in 2024, how quickly did the market feel that impact of losing that tax credit? And then if it were to be re-implemented or reinstated, what do you think that impact would look like, and what would be a time frame around it?
I mean, it was immediately impacted, like immediately. There was a rush in Q4 of 24 for additional biodiesel production. So we had a really nice tailwind in 2024. That oversupply flew in benefited a little bit in Q1 of 2025, but 2025 and early 2026 were the lowest biodiesel production that we've seen in years. There has been some recent improvement given economics, but we feel 40A, i.e. SEED, would create stability for a 3-year period. And it's not taking away anything from diesel. It's actually adding to the supply chain, which would ultimately reduce fuel costs.
Hey, Jesús, what goes into biodiesel? I know there's been, when it first was sort of introduced 20 years ago, there were some issues with the blends. There was an issue, particularly in the winter, of it causing problems up in sort of Minnesota. Talk a little bit about the evolution of biodiesel and sort of where it's at today and what actually it consists of.
Yeah, it's a very sophisticated process, and 2 main feedstocks. Soybean oil, pretty simple, right? Farmers benefit, or beef tallow. Early in the industry, there was some issues in winter specifically, but if there's been enough additives introduced in the market that really eliminated that, to the point where we don't even notice it anymore. 2024 was the highest production year ever, and it was minimal issues relative to history. There is some history and thought of consumers that biodiesel is some sort of competing or harmful additive to diesel, but it is actually a 1-for-1, and you don't even notice it anymore.
Jesus, the idea that farmers, particularly soybean farmers, have had a real rough go over the past 12 months, largely due to some of the trade retaliation from China. What is the percentage of production that soybean, how much does this really help the soybean farmers?
A ton. Today, the United States exports a lot of our soybean oil to China. By reintroducing 40A would again give that $1 tax credit incentive to domestic production and keep the fuel here. We don't need our domestic produced fuel or soybean oil going out to foreign markets. Why don't we keep that production here? Let American consumers benefit from that $1 tax credit.
So, Jesus, I know you guys have some investment in refineries that you got with your investment in Flying J or merger with Flying J. Why would you guys want this? It feels like, it's sort of a counter to your interest. When I first read it, I was like, explain to me why Pilot is incented to want this. It's a really interesting sort of conversation.
It's an interesting data point, but we do not own any refineries at Pilot. We do invest in infrastructure, midstream infrastructure, that ultimately allows us to rely more on our own fuel supply. We love having great partners and procure from some of the largest refiners in the U.S., but we really take our fuel supply ownership, our fuel supply chain ownership really, really serious, ultimately to ensure we have fuel at our retail locations. From a why would it interest us? Our number one priority is to have fuel at our stores for our customers and our fleets. how we lower our cost of goods ultimately allows us to treat our customers better. That's why it's important to us.
Is this ultimately about just securing the supply chain? Because I know in the past couple of years, I think it was 22, there was this massive issue, particularly in the Northeast, of diesel being out of stock, largely due to refining capacity. Is the idea that having more investment in biofuels would just provide more supply and resilience?
Well said, Craig. A complementary of sorts. As I mentioned earlier, the supply chain is very, very volatile right now, and it's very, very dependent on refinery utilization. If there's a region or a market where refineries have disruptions, unplanned disruptions, these biofuels would ultimately complement that market.
Yeah, I mean, Willie Nelson has been on the whole Bio Willie is what sort of a nickname. By the way, I went to Baylor University down in Waco, Texas. He has a truck stop, the old Carl's Corner, which used to be a seedy truck stop. He sort of turned it into Bio. I don't know if he still owns it or whatever, but it was Bio Willie was where you could. This is 2004, 2005 when he first came out with when biodiesel was sort of taking precedent. But he's all about the farmers. I mean, I think at the end of the day, this is not just about truckers, but it actually helps out U.S. farmers. So we have a bill in Congress. It's still in the very early phases. What's it going to take to get this passed?
There's really good momentum and there's good knowledge. So one, we spend a lot of time ensuring we have fuel at our stores. We spend a lot of time educating both our customers and just our congressmen. People really don't understand how biofuels works. And in this situation, both Mike Carey from Ohio, Representative Mike Carey from Ohio, and Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee did a really good job at partnering with us and ultimately understanding how this would benefit and leading the charge in Congress.
So what does it take? So we have the House and Senate. Do we think the president's going to sign it?
I hope so, and I believe he should. His number one priority is to reduce fuel cost. This would do it immediately. The question was asked earlier, how quickly would it have been implemented? It would be implemented rather quickly.
Yeah, I think the president.
Before it's transparent. I'm sorry.
Well, I think largely Congress, and I mean the one thing, and look to some of the credit, and I think there's some evidence here that farmers get a lot of love in the United States. Sometimes to perhaps, some people push back and say maybe overly so. I don't know if that's true or not, but there is a lot of pushback that if it's a farm bill, it typically is something that both chambers of Congress as well as the president will support. I think truckers get a little offended that the farmers get a bailout and they're like, where's my bailout? But this seems to be sort of an American tradition to help our farmers.
Well, and mutually beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, look, we gotta have food. Yeah. And look, America started out, I mean, there's two things about America. We were a warrior nation. We've been at war for 235 to 250 years. We're also a farming nation. I mean, we were started by effectively farmers and agriculture. This is really the foundation of America.
Farmers benefit, trucking companies benefit, consumers benefit. This one's an easy one.
So what is the downside for this, Jesus? Why would this not get passed? Who is it the oil companies that are going to have an issue with it? Perhaps who pushes back?
Yes, at the highest level, you could say that, Craig. The large oil companies are becoming integrated now. It's hard to say that a specific large oil company wouldn't benefit from this because everyone is diversified in nature. To me, it's quite frankly a bit of lack of knowledge. If everyone understood that there's more fuel supply coming to the United States of America that's domestically produced and costs would be reduced across farmers, trucking companies, and households, it's pretty simple.
I feel like we need landman education. Although I suspect the landmen might push back on this because it takes away the some of their demand. But really, I mean, energy is a commodity. We've had this massive disruption. I think one of the things you pointed out was just how remarkable energy prices, regardless of this major shock that we had in Hormuz, energy prices stayed relatively stable. We had John Kingston, he's our energy reporter, talk about the fact that it was unusual and unexpected that WTI, frankly, got up to 115 and didn't go any higher, and one of the greatest energy shocks in history. And it's really a reflection of America energy sufficiency.
1,000%. We are producing the most oil that we've ever produced in the U.S. The refining capacity, although there's less refineries in the market, the utilization's been higher than what it typically has been. So the United States has done an incredible job managing our own demand. And oh, by the way, exporting the highest amount of fuel that we've ever exported the previous 6 or 8 weeks. In spite of those two facts, prices stayed rather stable in the grand scheme of things. There will be regional volatility, as I mentioned earlier, given the refinery issues, if there's refinery issues.
Jesús, one of the things that I think we've been following this story is the president did invoke the Defense Production Act, which is to really drive. It's one of the, by the way, I think it's one of the greatest economic policy, industrial policy decisions that's come out of this administration. You could argue the tariffs were really bad for some of industry policy and really hurt some of the manufacturing industrial supply chain over the past year. But this Defense Production Act has not gotten a lot of love because I don't think people really follow it, but they need to build infrastructure. In your industry, how much is that really getting talked about, and how important is that law to really driving infrastructure development, particularly energy industrial development in the United States?
In simple, it's huge. As I mentioned earlier, the refiners are operating at an incredible level, and it's benefiting us fuel distributors, and it's ultimately benefiting the consumer. To invest more domestically in domestic production and refinery capacity would only add additional capabilities. In the West, there are two markets in the United States. East, very, very well developed in terms of infrastructure. West, very fragmented. There's talks of additional pipelines taking fuel from the Gulf Coast to West Coast. We need more of those types of investments. Those are long-term commitments that ultimately stabilize the U.S.
Do we think America, and I know this is maybe a political or public conversation, but do we think folks have woken up to the reality of the need for energy? I mean, I look at the Biden administration the first 2 years that were attacking, all forms of fossil fuel, carbon, and then we saw massive inflation and this sort of shock happen in energy. There seemed to be a change and a pivot in conversation about the fact that we need energy. There was some effort to lower energy prices. Do we think we've reached the chasm where now even places like California are starting to think, hey, we kind of need to have our own sources of energy?
Diesel will be here for a long time. Very, very important for the people listening and the listeners of FreightWaves. Right? It will be here for a long time. Adding biodiesel, adding renewable diesel only helps, but we'll be here for a long time. Unfortunately, you said it. It does feel like it'll take momentums and based on which regime is in office.
Yeah, I mean, like no crisis gone to waste. And I think one thing about these energy shocks, and we've seen it in Europe. I mean, one of the things that I think Germany learned the hard way was, they tried to decommission a lot of their energy sources. It's really stunted their industrial. As dysfunctional as our government is, one of the things about America is we're diehard capitalist. At least we are today. And that's one of the nice things about America is that we, even in pockets where we've tried to, try to move beyond or pretend that we could move beyond carbon and fossil fuels, it just hasn't happened. We're produced more than we've ever produced. We're a net energy exporter. It's a great to see, and I think this is one of the reasons our economy is thriving is because of our plentiful supply of energy.
Exactly. And our 900 locations across North America ultimately keep fuel moving, right? And ultimately helps freight.
Jesús, what about natural gas? I mean, that's the other thing that we produce so much in excess of the United States, and there was some attempts. I think back to the T. Boone Pickens when he was alive and he was the big champion of natural gas in trucking. Why did that never take off?
Diesel's easy. The infrastructure's there. Honestly, on a cost per mile. This is going to sound terrible. It's not expensive in the grand scheme of things, but we have to ensure that we continue to bring in things like seed and 48 to ensure that costs keep coming down.
Yeah, and then you also have hydrogen that's gotten a lot of attention, and EV. But to your point, diesel is still the lifeblood of the U.S. economy from a freight standpoint.
It will be here for a long time, and we do have investments in other those alternative fuels. Diesel and biodiesel will be here for a long, long time.
Are you seeing any pressure from electrification? I know that we've recorded or have discussed. There has been some pilot cases in EVs. Tesla is ramping up a huge factory for the semi. But there's a lot of mixed reports. I think for local, EV makes sense, or at least has gotten some more positive feedback. But over the road, it just doesn't work very well.
The significant amount of our investments will be in refined products, period. At the same time, we do keep an eye on fuel in the future. We do have a view on EV long-term. We do have a view of potential on hydrogen long-term, even CNG potentially somewhere in the middle. But diesel and biodiesel will be the fuels for us for a long, long time.
Well, I say follow the money, Julie, because if Warren Buffett or Berkshire Hathaway is investing in these things, I remember when he bought Pilot, there was a lot of conversations about diesel going away. There was also conversations about railroads going away when he bought BNSF, because the idea was that autonomous trucks were going to take over, and therefore railroads. Obviously, he's been right. He's right far more times than he's wrong. So
speaking of follow the money, I do have one more question on that.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm a big fan of breaking down the unit economics. So $1 per gallon savings with the biodiesel blend. What is that? Break that down of what it actually means for a fleet, for an owner operator. As you mentioned, the cost of diesel compared to others is relatively inexpensive. So what does this do to that?
In a general rough view, our estimations in 2025, when the credit went away, fuel cost went up $1 billion in the industry. A significant amount, i.e. 1 billion gallons of biodiesel went out of the market. So 1 billion gallons, i.e. $1 tax credit, were not ultimately benefited from fuel costs.
So what does that mean on a per gallon basis? Is that 20, 30 cents a gallon? Like, what's the number for on a per gallon?
No, I wouldn't say it's 20, 30 cents. I'd have to do the math and get back to you.
I mean, it's $1 billion, a lot of money.
A lot.
Yes.
A lot of money.
All domestic. Remember, all domestic, all U.S. consumption.
That is one of the great things about fracking. Like, I know it's gotten a bad rep by some, NIMBYism that's in America, which is ridiculous. But one of the great things about the shale revolution is how much dollars, like we used to flow to these beautiful cities in the Middle East. I mean, Dubai, and Saudi Arabia's trying to do it, built that with a large percent of American dollars. And now what we're seeing is that it's the dollars are staying here. And it's interesting.
Yes.
I do a lot of national news, and I go on to the major business networks and talk about freight and basically how great the industrial economy is performing now. And people are surprised by that, but I'm like, look, the Americas, and I'm using that term broadly to include places like Venezuela, Mexico, and Canada, it's the only place you can get energy that is not in a conflict zone. Like, that is great for America. And I'm so glad that Americans are waking up to the need for energy and plenty supply of it.
We agree. We agree at Pilot. Hence our investment in our stores, investment in our midstream infrastructure, investment in our policy that ultimately benefit fuel costs.
Yeah, I have a friend who has gone in this campaign about I love fossil fuels. Alex is all about the need for fossil fuels because it's so important. The whole carbon question is really, if you think about, look at what happened to Europe. No air condition, thousands of people are literally dying in Europe due to, even in New Jersey over the weekend, something like 24 deaths happened because of electricity. That is an unnecessary death. And it's largely because we have forgotten that energy is really what has enabled modern society to succeed. Jesús, we appreciate you for keeping the world running and America running and America's truckers running. That is a really important thing. Real quick, how can our audience help support this law so that we can all save money on our taxes?
If FreightWaves listeners feel fuel costs are important, please get with your local congressman and let them know about the SEED Act and how you support it and how ultimately it would lower your fuel cost.
I think he already knows what our audience thinks about it. So
all right.
We'll be back right after this with these.
We do a good job educating them. So
thank you.
Appreciate it, Jesús. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on.
It's National Safety Month, which makes this a great time to ask how your fleet can prevent more accidents. Samsara AI detects risks in real time, giving teams more visibility into what's happening on the road and more context to coach drivers before risky moments become incidents. Fleets using Samsara Complete AI Safety Solution have reduced crash rates by nearly 75%. See the data behind the results in the Samsara Safety Report at samsara.com/freightwaves.
Race car drivers like NASCAR champion Jesse Love are a lot like commercial drivers, pros. But even the best in the world still watch the tape to see what they missed and get better next time. So we created the Samsara Driving Coach.
Great race, Jesse, but you were following too closely and you were speeding.
Okay, you got me on that one.
Samsara uses insights from millions of professional drivers to coach drivers in real time.
Because even champions need a coach.
Give me the keys.
What's the masterclass all about? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you're a driver, you're an owner-operator, you're a fleet owner, whether you're in compliance services, dispatcher, no matter what it is, masterclass is for you. Every 2 weeks, you're going to sit down with me and we're going to go over certain business topics that are related specifically to your small trucking company operations. We're going to help you with everything from compliance to how to negotiate better on the spot board, how to find direct freight, and everything in between. This is the reason why you don't want to miss out on Masterclass. It's about an hour to an hour and a half, and then on top of that, you'll have the library to you so that way you can always research and reflect back onto it. Don't miss out this opportunity. This is built specifically for you. I'm excited and I hope to see you in class.
Imagine a world where your freight moves as fast as a digital pulse. What if your visibility didn't just tell you where a truck was, but exactly where it needed to be 48 hours from now? Think of a logistics network that corrects its own mistakes before they cost you a single dime. What if your supply chain could think for itself? Imagine AI agents negotiating rates in milliseconds, predictive models that solve labor shortages before they even happen. This isn't science fiction, it's the agenda. On July 15th at the historic Old Post Office in Chicago, FreightWaves presents the Supply Chain AI Symposium. We are defining in real time how AI is embedded into every mile, every warehouse, and every handshake. Because in 2026, the future isn't just coming, it's already negotiating. The FreightWaves Supply Chain AI Symposium. Secure your spot now.
Welcome back. We are going to take a deep dive into the SONAR data with Craig's SONAR update.
$4 a mile on the daily van spot rates. We're at $4.01 a mile. It's the first time ever. It's the first time ever that we've seen trucking van spot rates break above $4 a mile. And just a reflection of just how tight this market is, a year ago we were at $2.19 in terms of van spot rates. So we've gone up $1.80 and just I think an insane, unprecedented increase in trucking spot rates outside of the extremes of COVID. But the fact that these are the highest levels ever is just a testament to just how tight capacity is and how much shippers and brokers are having to pay up. We look at the daily trucking spot rates, we're at 401, which is really what happened yesterday. On the weekly, we're at 380 a mile. That's a 7-day moving average, but that's also a record. Capacity is incredibly tight. There's no denying it. We're going to start to see shippers pay up for more contracted loads. They're tired of paying high spot rates or having freight denied. We could see this in rejection levels. Rejection levels got as high as 17.5%, but did not increase. We're at 16.92% today. Just the fact that motor carriers are accepting a slightly more loads than they were before is probably a reflection of the fact that they are getting higher contracted rates and are willing to accept more loads in the contract market than they were before because shippers are paying up. I think earlier on this year, there was a lot of denial and sort of a lack of acceptance among shippers that we're going to have to pay up for capacity. This happens every single time the market turns. It takes a while for shippers to accept a new reality. We talked about the fact that a lot of shippers have never seen a carrier's market. There's been a lot of turnover in shipping departments over the last couple of years, and therefore they don't really know what it looks like when carriers have all of the pricing power and are willing to hold out for higher rates and not willing to accept loads at their existing contracted levels, even for stuff that they may have bid on just a couple of months ago. When we look at contracted rates, we're at $265 a mile. Put this in perspective, we're at $380 a mile, so there's a $1.15 spread between those two levels. But this is happening at a time when we're headed into really a really tight market in the second half. Second half conditions are always better. And I think we'll see increasing contracted rates through the rest of the year. No shipper, because really the calendar starts to take over as we get to the second half of the year. They start worrying about the holiday peak season. That's really important because if they lose those sales, 40% of retail sales is related to holiday, they lose those sales, then they're going to basically forever forego those opportunities. So we're going to see shippers pay up for a lot of capacity and really try to secure capacity. We've heard this on public calls that a lot of the motor carriers, the big motor carriers have talked about the shippers, are already talking to them about securing capacity for the second half, particularly peak season, and are worried about it. The fact that that's happening in the spring or happened in the spring is really just tells you everything you need to know about how shippers are thinking about the second half. Now, when we look at other market conditions, diesel prices are dropping. We've seen diesel prices drop by as much as 90 pennies per gallon, which is really happened since we've had resolution in the Middle East. No more hot kinetic conflict. Although there's a couple of skirmishes, and we could say there's some strategic attacks. It looks like we're going to have this go on for many years, probably, where the Iran folks are out attacking U.S. interest or their Middle Eastern partners, and therefore there's going to be continued conflict, but it's not going to probably break out into a full-blown conflict like we knew before, and therefore oil prices are not likely to be under a lot of pressure. WTI is at $69 a barrel, and the fact that it continues to drop is just a sentiment indicator of how folks that are trading oil believe that market conditions in terms of oil and oil availability will continue to drop over the next couple of months. And the fact that this will provide some relief for U.S. consumers at the pump, but also U.S. businesses, is really reflected in those numbers. Now, one of the things that I'm looking at is the international container market, because international container spot rates, this is China to the United States West Coast, have surged above $7,000. This is happening despite cheaper fuel prices, but it's a reflection of how much pricing power the ocean container carriers have. They're able to charge a much higher rate for ocean capacity, and this means that shippers are going to have to pay up for ocean capacity if they want it in the second half of the year. Now, interesting enough, volumes are not increasing substantially. They're well below what they were last year and even the year before in terms of international exports or international imports into the United States. And this tells us that pricing power is really how the ocean container companies are managing it. It's not a volume-related issue, but they're pulling capacity off the market, and that's giving them an enormous amount of leverage. This will impact shipping budgets. They're going to see it in higher container cost, as well as just the overall conditions in trucking markets means that we're going to see some shipping inflation. You'll probably hear about that a lot on the news, where shippers are just having to pay up on every mode of traffic. It's important that shippers are using data sources. We have SONAR, which provides both container prices, container market intelligence, as well as trucking market intelligence. In fact, all modes in terms of market intelligence, and you can get that by going to getfreightdata.com or gosonar.com and sign up. You can get really everything from quick rates, which is van spot rates that are really through our track data. You can get Market Monitor to look at macro market conditions. You can also get what we call core SONAR, which is all of the data sets. We publish 4.5 million data points a day, really every single element in the freight market, where you can make better decisions about how to manage your supply chain and think about market conditions. And if you're a shipper and you're trying to understand where the market's headed, SONAR is the best and frankly the only resource that can provide you both rate intelligence and benchmarking, but also supply and demand metrics in a real-time basis.
All right, so we talked about it a little bit earlier. Tender rejections kind of just holding steady, staying around that 17%.
Yeah, I was wrong. I thought we would
holiday.
get above 20%. I thought we would see a surge going into July 4th. It was interesting because it seemed like the surge last couple of years have happened later in the week. This surge happened the week before. It's going to be interesting to watch this week to see what happens. But I was surprised it dropped off. I was really expecting it. We could get above 20. There's nothing to say we won't, but it also suggests that perhaps what we saw over the last week was really carriers that were out were willing to take their loads under contracted rates, and I think that sort of set this tone for the rest of the year.
Yeah, but we haven't seen it affect rates at all, right? Well, I mean,
spot rates are
I'm
up.
saying we haven't seen it affect rates negatively, right? So
Correct.
even
Yes,
with
right.
tender rejections holding pretty steady and not rising the way we thought, spot rates still have continued to rise, and contract rates are starting.
We're at a 7-day record. We're at 380 a mile on spot rates, and we are at 401.
Right about 4, yeah.
And when you net out fuel out of that, we're at 305 a mile in terms of the line haul only rate. But it's really, I think, really a reflection of just how tight capacity is. And we've talked about this. And just one last point, Julian, I know you've heard it, is a lot of shippers have not gone through a cycle where carriers had really spent a lot of turnover of people in these jobs. And a lot of shippers have not seen a carrier's market. Now, maybe those that were during COVID thought, hey, this is an anomaly. Everything's kind of screwed up and they got away with it. But even those shippers that lived through that were not prepared for a market this year.
Normal seasonality compared
I think there's a lot of denial. I know there was a lot of conversations back and forth earlier this year about the fact that this is just, it's just weather. This is short-lived. I think as we've heard since road check, that was sort of everyone was put on notice that this is not going to go away anytime soon.
I thought the interesting part that we haven't talked about, though, is the imports and the rising prices from...
Rates are on fire, and it's not reflected in volume. And that's the interesting thing is you're seeing spot rates for international containers on a TEU basis jump to $7,000. It's been a couple of years since we've seen that. And this is really at a time when fuel prices are dropping. And so really, I think it's just a reflection of how much pricing power the ocean container lines have. And unfortunately, American consumers and American businesses have to pay these rates. These are because of the massive amount of concentration that the international ocean container lines have over the international shipping market. They, in many ways, are able to set price. I mean, truckers should be so jealous.
Oh, it's not as fragmented as trucking, so they absolutely have more.
I mean, you're dealing with two different universes. I mean, the top 10 trucking companies have something like 12% of total capacity. The top 10 ocean container lines have 90%, and that's, of course, if you include Zim and the Hapag-Lloyd number because they had this acquisition pending. That is really what's going on, and I think they just have an enormous amount of pricing power. They get to set the tone of the market. What they'll do is they'll pull capacity of the market. To put this in perspective, OPEC has about 35%. This is we've had some people leave OPEC, but sort of early, if you go back a year ago, OPEC had about 35% of oil supplies. Everyone knows it's a cartel. Like it has the ability to manipulate market prices by pulling capacity off the market. It's the same way the ocean container lines do. What I think is insane about this is they can collude on schedules and therefore collude on pricing, and they are not subject to U.S. antitrust. Kind of ridiculous. And they're not owned by Americans. That's the other thing. If you go to the largest international ocean container line, you have to get to number 30 on the list before you see a U.S. container line. They own less than something like 0.5% of all international ocean container freight is U.S. flagged. It just shows how much we are subject to this and how important what happens in the global supply chain impacts us in the United States.
That's right. All right. With that, we are going to get into our verified segment presented by Highway. And to do that, we're going to take a look at the latest fraud stories impacting our industry. A California truck driver is in custody in Indiana after the police say he used fake documents to steal nearly $3 million in cargo. A 31-year-old man from Fresno was arrested June 28th after Greenfield, Indiana police stopped his semi on Interstate 70. Authorities say the suspect used fraudulent paperwork to obtain a load of nearly 40,000 pounds of tungsten oxide powder stolen 5 days earlier in Pennsylvania. The shipment, valued at just under $2.9 million, was bound for Mitsubishi Materials Corporation in Japan. A company representative traveled to Greenfield the following day to take possession of the recovered cargo. The suspect faces theft and fraud-related charges in Pennsylvania. Indiana prosecutors are determining whether to file additional charges. In a separate case, a former controller at Austin Freight Systems pleaded guilty this week to federal embezzlement charges after prosecutors say he stole more than $3.2 million from the freight brokerage. The FBI investigated that case. Company officials say they have since strengthened internal financial controls and are continuing normal operations. We keep you covered with the latest schemes hitting logistics. Verified, presented by Highway.
What a nonstop set of stories when talking about fraud.
I mean, it really, first of all, I can say this, right? Ballsy, like this controller,
embezzle, but it makes sense. I mean, you're dealing with a lot of high dollar, and you saw this at US Express. Where we saw the most embezzlement was in like breakdown and fuel.
Yeah,
that's where you tend to have
advances,
the
wherever
fraud.
you're asking for advances.
Advances, yeah, because they're high dollars. It's not unusual to have a lot of big tickets go through that. And if you're a freight broker, it's easy to have fake motor carriers as part of your capacity providers. That's what, at least what I read into it, is that he was originating freight bills with carriers that didn't exist.
What is going on with the tungsten? What do you do with? I had to Google this. Like, what do you do with tungsten oxide? And apparently, you use it to make machine components or parts. So maybe parts for. And we talked about it's a commodity, so it's easy to untraceable, easy to sell. But I feel like that would be a relatively niche buyer. I don't know what you do.
Well, it is niche, but I think one of the things when we had the fraud summit up in Cleveland this year, I talked to the FBI agent who we interviewed and said one of the biggest sources of crime is recycled metals like copper. We've had a number of copper loads. We've covered this on FreightWaves Today. Copper loads and metal loads that get stolen because they're unlike, let's say, computers or shoes. Those are relatively, I wouldn't say shoes are easy to track, but they're much easier. If somebody shows up with a truckload of Air Jordans, you're probably going to be able to trace it eventually back to where it was stolen. And there was a case in California of some big influencer store where they were connected to these basically thefts that were in the athletic shoe department or athletic shoe theft. When it comes to tungstens, copper, avocados, things that are just commodities where they're not serial trademarked, and like metals and raw materials are easy to sort of melt down and ultimately price. I think if we're being completely frank, I think most buyers probably don't really ask questions, don't ask, don't tell. In fact, that's what the FBI said, is that one of the big problems with these recycled metals is that the whole industry is a little dirty. I mean, he admitted that to me. I'm not passing judgment on the recycled metals industry, but his statement was it's a really dirty industry.
Yeah.
And that's why there's a lot of temptation to use these metals because they can't be traced back to their source. And so it makes it quite attractive for thieves because you can essentially fence it. I mean, you've seen places like in Africa and in Mexico, even in the United States, when copper was really tight, they were ripping the lines off to resell it and melt it and resell it. So you see that.
Well, all right. With that, we are going to take a quick break, and we will be back with Brandon Fried to talk about market conditions and our air cargo.
Race car drivers like NASCAR champion Jesús are a lot like commercial drivers, pros. But even the best in the world still watch the tape to see what they missed and get better next time. So we created the Samsara driving coach.
Great race, Jesse, but you were following too closely and you were speeding.
Okay, you got me on that one.
Samsara uses insights from millions of professional drivers to coach drivers in real time.
Because even champions need a coach.
Give me the keys.
The super successful people are part of the 1%. They're part of that very, very small percentage. That's why I don't want you to do things that everybody's doing. I want you to do the small things that nobody else is doing. The people that are most successful in this business treat it like it's the only thing that's bringing income into their household. If you do that, then you'll have the same results. These people operate like they have no other chance. They have nothing else going. This is the only breadwinner that they have in play. I'm Adam Wingfield, and this is the FreightWaves Playbook. Become part of the 1%. Sign up for FreightWaves Playbook today.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Today. We have Brandon Freed. He is the director of the Air Forwarders Association. Brandon, welcome. It's been some time, my friend. How are you?
As my kids said, it's been a minute. So,
it has been a minute. We're so glad you joined us. You've got some retirement coming up sometime, I think at the end of the year. What are you hoping to accomplish between now and then?
Well, I've accepted a very high-level position as the vice president of lunch. So if you want to come to Washington after I leave the Air Forwarders Association and sit down and hear useless opinions, I'll be here. So that's feel free to have lunch. And if you're paying, the opinions will get even better. So good to see everyone.
Tell us what we want to hear. I'm happy to buy lunch. Last time I went to D.C. and bought somebody lunch, it was a bunch of attorneys. These were attorneys that we did, Bryan Cave. I'm going to call them out because we did a lot of business with them. I went up and visited them, and they're like, hey, they brought like 10 attorneys in, and they sent me the bill. And I was like, no, this is not cool. Like, it was a casual
Did it pay for lunch, and was it billable hours?
It was billable hours. I didn't even know it was billing. Anyways, that was my great lawyer story from D.C. So I've always, when someone in Washington, D.C., Brandon, invites me to have lunch with them, I'm always a little skeptical because there's a price to be paid in DC for everything.
Yeah, be careful. But I'll be honest and even with you, so that's not a problem. Hey, I heard your previous discussion on, whatever happened to the good old days where they would just jimmy the back doors of a truck and take a few boxes out. Now they're stealing loads, and it's
far more sophisticated. I mean, to your point, we do cover stories where one of the more sophisticated crimes is they will actually, in transit, take off the doors, steal a pallet or two. The sill's never been broken. They put the doors back on, and the shipper, the consignee, receives the freight. They don't complete a count properly. The bill ladens are signed off.
Or the bills are doctored.
The bills have been doctored too. That's another example of it. I know there's a major...
And they're getting into our email systems, and they're mining the data and masquerading, as the trucker we're actually talking about. And they're stealing loads left and right. And that's one of the reasons why the Air Forwarders Association continue to work with the National Retail Federation and others in this Combating Organized Retail Crime Act, which has passed the U.S. House of Representatives, is now moving on to the Senate. That'll give Homeland Security more money to start fighting this, because up to now, we started we're a bunch of air freight forwarders, and this wasn't a big issue until it became a big issue. Most of our members have been adversely impacted by it. And, we started to realize that we had to get more involved in it. So we started a cargo theft committee, and it's up and running now. And we're getting involved. We've been up on Capitol Hill several times. We have a lobbyist up there. So it's worked out very well. But we're looking forward to that passing and getting more money to fight this scourge.
Well, Brandon, what is look, in trucking at least, we've seen the massive surge of cargo theft, organized cargo theft, a lot of times perpetrated from overseas. It felt like after COVID, sort of 2022 on, is really where this stuff became very, very lucrative and grew exponentially. Has that been the same case in air cargo?
Yeah, not as much in air cargo. We don't see the type of theft activity, and I think that's mainly because of increased security. As I leave the Air Forwarders Association and I look back on my career here, I've been in this business a long time. For those of you who may not be aware, I'm a recovering freight forwarder that sold his business and took a job running the Air Forwarders Association 21 years ago. And the biggest event that I think has occurred in the past 21 years is the advent of more air cargo security. It's become part of our culture. We're a deregulated business, but we are de facto regulated because obviously, we're under very strict security programs with the Transportation Security Administration. So I think the freight is watched a lot closer on the air cargo side. Now, with that said, I want to be clear that there are still issues in air cargo. Freight gets taken on the way to the airport, leaving the airport. We've got issues, but generally speaking, when the carrier has it, it's pretty safe.
So know your shipper is really the whole concept that came out after, September 11, unfortunately, sort of really tracking, this whole idea of trying to prevent terrorism. And in those days, everyone was worried about, and I guess they still are, worried about someone putting something on a plane that would cause it to go down. Part of those real rules was always about knowing your counterparty, knowing who's putting things on into a belly of a commercial aircraft. There are lessons in that for trucking. Like, what lessons have the forwarders, look, I think you guys have a near perfect track record. At least the forwarding community has a near perfect track record. As vulnerable as our supply chain is.
On wood. We're knocking on wood, yeah.
There's been so many things that your industry has done successfully. What can trucking brokerage learn from the forwarders?
So one of the things that we learned in air cargo was that this is a risk-based, multi-level approach to security. So you need to not only know your shipper. We do that through the Transportation Security Administration's known shipper program. You got to know who you're doing business with, and they have a database, which, by the way, is now under review. We're focusing with the TSA on how we can improve it to make it more reflective of today's current market realities. But we're also screening our cargo at 100%, something, by the way, we weren't doing after September 11, 2001. We didn't start doing that fully until after 2005 with the 9/11 Recommendations Act. So, and again, we've got security programs. So if we see something that is unusual, we have to report it. And of course, maybe this is an advantage. Some call it a disadvantage. The TSA has 500 security inspectors just focused on air cargo and specifically freight forwarders. They're always on our docks. They're always looking through our files. They want to know who's giving us the freight, and they're analyzing who those people are before it even ships on a plane. So I think that you have to remember that there's not one fix. It's multiple fixes. And you've always got to be at the table. You always have to be having meetings, figuring out ways that you can improve your defense mechanisms. Because you know what? The bad guys are having meetings too. They've gotten very smart. And, they're adopting automation, something our industry probably was slow to the table to get done, and now is making up for lost time. But you have to understand that they're smart now, and you got to be smarter.
Well, I think there's a lesson to be learned. I mean, FMCSA that regulates the entire trucking industry only has something like 300 or 400 total investigators. TSA has more, as you mentioned, managing.
And that's just their cargo.
Which is absolutely remarkable. But again, I think the track record is absolutely impeccable, or at least nearly impeccable. And it's reflected on how much investment has been invested in security and how much responsibility the forwarders have, and frankly, how serious they take it. I remember, I worked on a road feeder service, Express Global, that competed against Forward Air. We were the Forward Air's primary point-to-point national competitor. And we were, we took that role very serious. Of course, it was a heightened security time right after September 11th, but it was something we took very serious. And anytime we looked at anything suspicious, we would report it. I think there's a lot to be learned from that. I've argued that trucking all shipments, because domestic supply chain is very vulnerable. I've argued that all shipments should require some know your shipper requirements, and that should be instilled in freight brokers as well as carriers should actually know who's moving cargo. And there should be some database of bad actors.
I agree. And, the lessons of September 11th are, they haven't been diluted with us. We continue to remember the lessons taught from back then. And they've been the guiding principle of security regimes in the United States and elsewhere also. Failure is not an option for us. We got to make sure that we're successful every single day. We can't let the one vulnerability, the weak link in the chain, slip. So, and I think forwarders know that, and the TSA makes sure we know it, by the way. So when after September 11th, there were a lot more forwarders, and many just left the business because it got the price of non-compliance got very expensive for us.
I remember it, Brendan. I was working air cargo at the DFW airport when September 11 happened. My apartment was right next to, it was Grapevine, Texas, right next to the DFW airport. And I remember that morning of the planes just scream, because usually they would come in very slow. They were screaming down to the ground, and the entire airport. It was the most eerie thing I remember, was just no sound of that background noise of these jets taking off and landing at DFW. Yeah. So a remarkable time, but I think there's a lot of lessons. I think the domestic trucking industry can take a lot of lessons from air cargo. I've also argued that, you know your customer, which is related to money movement. Those are lessons we could easily apply in trucking. And I wish that the government would do that, because I think our supply chain would be much safer.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. And we're obviously trying to keep bombs out of boxes. That's our big concern, and we don't want them flying in the bellies of passenger planes. But I do agree with you, Craig, that, we could take lessons learned at the TSA and our various working groups that the Air Forwarders Association and others have participated in for years now, and make, it's all part of being a partner with the federal government. So everyone understands we're all on the same team, regardless of who is in office. We try to make these things apolitical. The bad guys exploit differences in our opinions, and that's a vulnerability. So when we walk into TSA headquarters, there's no party affiliation. We all work together to keep America safe. So I do agree with you.
Brandon, I want to make sure we have time to talk about IATA's direct airway bill liability changes that just took effect on July 1st. Can you tell us what actually changed and what forwarders should be paying attention to regarding that?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you a quick, just a very topical 40,000 foot overview as we understand it, because this is something that the Federation of International Freight Forwarders, FIATA, they call it. We're a member of FIATA. They're an international group based in Geneva, and they represent forwarding associations worldwide. And they brought this issue to our attention a while back. And basically, this has to do with what they call direct airway bills, where instead of the shipment being consolidated under where a freight forwarder will draft a master airway bill with the airline and put a consolidation of multiple house bills under that. These are primarily just a shipment that is given to an airline from a shipper for various reasons, and the freight forwarder lists as is just a party, an intermediary party that's listed on the bill of lading. And so we've, for a long time, freight forwarders have said to airlines, listen, you used to call us your agent, airline's agent. We're not really agents in today's world. We're your customers, and we want to be treated as such. And so IATA said, the International Air Transport Association that represents the international airlines, said, well, if you want to be treated as the customer, you're going to take the liabilities on as that customer. And we said, well, wait a minute, we're still intermediaries, and for instance, let's say on a dangerous goods shipment, just as an example, if there was an issue regarding that shipment that was an oversight on the part of the actual shipper, the airlines or IATA is saying, well, you should take responsibility for that. And we as forwarders say, no, we can't take complete responsibility for things we have no control over. And that's the shipper's omissions. We have no control over that. So it's been an interesting issue. I think that FIATA has been fighting this for a long time. There was supposed to be a delay or a postponement of these new regulations that went into effect. It's been tough for us to understand what those regulations are. The postponement, to our knowledge, hasn't come through. And our guidance that we've gotten so far from FIATA is basically you got to talk to each carrier directly to see what they're going to be imposing upon you as forwarders and on this direct airway bill situation. So the advice we're giving our members at this point is your insurance carrier, your insurance agent should be your new best friend. You should be sitting down with your insurance people and understanding what your liability is, understanding what your contractual obligations are, and where your coverages may lie. And this is unfolding as we go, but we're watching it very carefully.
Hey, Brandon, I got to ask one last question. So with this pressure being created for forwarders, Amazon air cargo starting to compete, tariffs and all the other pressures for forwarders, what do you think demand and the market for your business will look like the rest of the year?
Hey, listen, as I told you, I'm a recovering freight forwarder. Competition has always been around. And so some of my members might disagree with me, but I welcome the competition. It gives us a very vigorous and competitive market. Amazon Air Cargo is a member of the Air Forwarders Association. They provide services to our industry. They're going to be in the market now, and it just shows you how vibrant our industry is. At the same time, this has always been a very palm-to-palm personalized business. And so it is characterized mostly by niche players. Not everyone is super huge, intergalactic. They have a lot of small niche players. We've got, I'll give you some examples just off the top of my head, like Rocket Cargo is one of our very distinguished members, and they ship rock band equipment, for the likes of, I guess, Bruce Springsteen and the Rolling Stones. And
all the logistics for the World Cup.
Yep.
We had the
CEO on a few weeks ago.
Okay. Brandon. What's that again? Say again?
We had the CEO on a few weeks ago talking about the World Cup. Speaking of
that's right,
America.
That's right.
Right.
And Danny Rosenthal. And, we're like, okay, so now is Amazon going to be in that business? I don't know. But I probably not. I come from an art freight forwarding in background where I shipped a lot of artwork. I used to ship a lot of trade show stuff. So, it required very specific expertise. And that's how our industry thrives. So welcome, Amazon. We're used to the competition, and it makes our business even better.
Yeah, Amazon feels like they're going to focus on a lot of the high volume, actually a lot of mid-market shippers. I don't know that they'll compete directly with the big guys in terms of high volume, but a lot of these small shippers that are looking for lift capacity that perhaps they can't get it. I think that's where Amazon's going to succeed. And look, it's just a testament to this business. We'd love to have you back. I got to talk. Every time I get to talk about air freight, I get excited because it's where I started my career. Was selling airport-to-airport services across the air. We'd have to ask Brandon all about things like Kitty Hawk and Forward Air and really what's going on there. Coming back up, we've got Bryan Lewis. He is the CEO of Intellicheck. We'll be right back.
Race car drivers like NASCAR champion Jesús are a lot like commercial drivers, pros. But even the best in the world still watch the tape to see what they missed and get better next time. So we created the Samsara driving coach.
Great race, Jesse, but you were following too closely and you were speeding.
Okay, you got me on that one.
Samsara uses insights from millions of professional drivers to coach drivers in real time.
Because even champions need a coach.
Give me the keys.
What's the masterclass all about? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you're a driver, you're an owner-operator, you're a fleet owner, whether you're in compliance services, dispatcher, no matter what it is, masterclass is for you. Every 2 weeks, you're going to sit down with me and we're going to go over certain business topics that are related specifically to your small trucking company operations. We're going to help you with everything from compliance to how to negotiate better on the spot board, how to find direct freight, and everything in between. This is the reason why you don't want to miss out on Masterclass. It's about an hour to an hour and a half. And then on top of that, you'll have the library to you so that way you can always research and reflect back onto it. Don't miss out this opportunity. This is built specifically for you. I'm excited and I hope to see you in class.
Imagine a world where your freight moves as fast as a digital pulse. What if your visibility didn't just tell you where a truck was, but exactly where it needed to be 48 hours from now? Think of a logistics network that corrects its own mistakes before they cost you a single dime. What if your supply chain could think for itself? Imagine AI agents negotiating rates in milliseconds, predictive models that solve labor shortages before they even happen. This isn't science fiction, it's the agenda. On July 15th at the historic Old Post Office in Chicago, FreightWaves presents the Supply Chain AI Symposium. We are defining in real time how AI is embedded into every mile, every warehouse, and every handshake. Because in 2026, the future isn't just coming, it's already negotiating. The FreightWaves Supply Chain AI Symposium. Secure your spot now.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Today. We're going to get into, like we covered these big fraud stories, Julie. We're going to get into that in the second half. We've got a lot of it comes down to knowing your counterparty. And we talked to Brandon about knowing who's actually entering the air freight system, know your shipper. Identity is that's what it's all about.
Yeah, we've got two great guests coming up for the rest of the day today. We have Pawan Joshi of E2 Open. We're going to talk a little bit about how they're getting smarter, criminals are getting smarter, what they're doing at E2 Open to make sure the industry has what they need, and Bryan Lewis of Intellicheck. So yes, all the things about vulnerabilities. And as technology moves forward in order to help us fight some of this fraud, I want to talk a little bit about AI and our upcoming AI Summit on July 15th, correct?
It's almost sold out, by the way. We are down to the last few tickets. So if you haven't got your tickets to AI Summit in Chicago, please go there. I get inbound messages of people wanting discounts. I'm like, look, we have sponsors that are still looking at it. We're down to the last few tickets, so be sure to get that. That's in Chicago coming up
July 15th,
next
right?
Wednesday. So look, it's a great venue. It's the one day of the year where we bring in anyone that's interested in AI, what's happening in supply chain, to really spend the entire day talking about what it's going to take to really implement these technologies, what technologies are emerging. So if you're interested in AI, be sure to get your tickets today at freightwaves.com.
Yeah, it'll be great.
So it's a lot going on. Well, I'd like to bring our next guest in. Bryan Lewis is the CEO of Intellicheck. Bryan, knowing your counterparty in any industry, talk about banking and finance, of who you're wiring money to is important. And we talked to Brandon Freed about, what's actually going on in air freight, knowing your shipper. You guys are providing technology to know who the counterparty is and do ID verification at Intellicheck. Tell us a little bit about what you're implementing.
Look, I will start this conversation off by saying I generally bum people out after they hear me talk, because the ability to steal your identity is, amazingly easy. And that's what people do, right? We've all been hacked. We've all got our information out there. And then what the bad guys do is use that to commit crime. Whether it is going into a store and opening a credit card in your name, or pretending to be a driver and taking off with the trailer. And I think the average loss on that is, $300,000 from what I've read. And cargo theft, $35 billion annually. So, it's big numbers. It's easy to do. The cheapest thing is buying your identity. The most expensive thing, which is $40, is buying a driver's license that looks so real, most law enforcement officers can't tell it from the real thing. So identity and knowing who the person you're dealing with on any transaction is becoming more and more important. And it's all organized crime. And they always look for the soft underbelly. What's the easiest thing we can do right now to make money? And certainly from what we're seeing from the customers that are coming to us now is a lot of it has to do with shipping and logistics.
So we've talked a lot on the show about, verifying a carrier, knowing who you're working with. But there's a difference between verifying a carrier and verifying the person physically taking possession of your load. So can you talk us through that distinction?
Yeah, because it's sort of the same thing, right? So verifying the carrier is one thing because, right, you know who they are and they've got some credibility to them. But the same bad guys can fake the carrier out and then fake you out. So it's sort of knowing who you are dealing with at the time that you transfer, the product, whatever that product is a very important thing. And it has a whole bunch of supply chain issues to it, right? We work with some automotive companies that are very worried about their suppliers because, they miss a shipment or two. They're kind of, their chain could shut down, right? The place where they're building their cars, and that costs them, thousands of dollars a minute. So knowing, first step, make sure you're dealing with a reputable company. But the second step is always making sure you know who you are dealing with at the point of transfer of product.
What is it? I'm curious. Has been an evolution of, talking to Brandon earlier, just how things have changed at September 11 over the last 20 years. But we cover all this freight fraud. We had 2 stories this morning where there are multiple millions of dollars that were committed in various different elaborate sets of crimes. Where is this all headed? What are some of the emerging threats that you're seeing?
So I think the emerging threats that we're seeing is partially AI is making it much easier to create documents that look very, very real, right? And, I'll be very honest about it. Most of these documents come from China, which is where we buy most of the plastic to make the licenses. So they are very, very accurate. And I think most people are still relying on a visual inspection. The person comes in, here's my license, I'll look at it, it looks real, here you go, and then the trailer's gone. Technology can change that. And I think that, there's a couple of things. One, we need to make sure the technology is fast and accurate. And that is where I think the world needs to go. How do you figure out how to move beyond just a person looking at whatever document is coming in and saying, it looks good, to using technology to say, no, it is good. And, most of these technologies, like ours, super accurate. And, you lose one load, you probably paid for the product for a year. So it's kind of, the way I look at it is like cheap insurance to make sure that you're protecting your business.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about that and how do you add stronger identity checks at pickup without slowing down the process? You talked about, using technology, it being a quick process. Can you talk in detail a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So like, for example, what we do, and the freight companies that are using us do it on a mobile app. And it's real simple, and it takes less than 44 milliseconds to scan a license and determine if it's real or not. So many industries that we are in care about speed, right? I will bet that just about 80% of the people on this call have gone through our process and never, ever knew it because it's that fast. The last thing, say, a retailer wants when they say, do you want to save 10% today and get a new credit card, is to have the line back up. So speed is really, really important. And that's exactly why the freight companies that are using us love us. Take the driver's license, scan it, bang, you've got an answer. Is it real or not? And, that gives them the surety to know I can let this load go.
Bryan, is it something to do with the algorithm on the back end? Again, I know that you've got to somewhat keep the formula somewhat secret because it's an evolution. But does it have to do with the way you guys are scanning the database to verify that the photo that's on the ID is actually state issued? Is that how it works, or what can you tell us?
So look, I have stacks and stacks and stacks of fake IDs that our law enforcement agencies and our customers give us. I think one of the common misperceptions is that if a license scans, it's real, but it does not mean that at all. And what I will also say is no state, territory, province, Canada, US, has the same format. Every one of them is different. And they all have different security features in them. Some of them have digital keys that you need to understand how to unlock. Some have checksum weird digit programs going into it. And that's what we check. And from the Intellicheck side, that's because we've been working with the DMVs since the 90s to help them when they bring out new barcodes. So we understand what they're doing inside that barcode. Now, the reason every barcode will scan is because AMVA, which is the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, which everybody in Canada and the US belongs to, publishes a standard format. And again, nobody uses that format except for the bad guys. So that way they know it's going to scan. So every single one of these fakes that I have will scan, but it doesn't mean they're real.
It's evolved. If I'm confessing, I tried to make my own fake ID with a scanner and a printer in college. But that was how it used to be. You couldn't get sophisticated ID. It always felt like one of these movies you'd watch, person's trying to escape, and it would be very elaborate. They'd have to know somebody, $100,000 to get a fake ID. What you're describing is it's super simple, right off the internet, $50 to become someone's new identity.
Both on the bright web and the dark web. And the other scary bit about it is, if you look at, say, the United Healthcare hack, which happened last year, not only was the PII, the personally identifiable information on a lot of people hacked, they had photos of the IDs. And if you go to these websites, it allows you to plug in the driver's license number, the document discriminator, and every other piece of information, right? So, even if they checked against the DMV record, it would look to be real because all the information would match. But what they can't do is create that barcode that has the secret sauce of that particular state or province, because that is basically unhackable. So, it is scary how much about us all is out there, and then what people can do with it. And it's, again, I'm going to say it's not just, going and stealing a trailer. It's stealing your identity and ripping you off everywhere.
Bryan, one of the stories I've heard as we've been covering this whole freight fraud thing and non-domiciled CDLs and trucking is that, in certain, I think Somalia, we had an executive at a very large broker that told me a story. He was in an Uber and he was it was a Somali driver, and the Somali driver confessed to him that there's one CDL for this whole group of people. And the comment was made that the law enforcement can't tell us the difference. It seemed like something you can't say in public, but the guy was offering it up that they're sharing identity because law enforcement can't tell the difference when you get into these very specific groups of people. How do we fend this off? If you have someone who's borrowed an ID or are transferring the ID, how are you possibly able to do it without outside of a fingerprinting? Like when law enforcement pulls them over, how do they know this guy is legit?
Yeah, I think you're talking about like I think they call it license rental, right? Where I will, my Uber license or my DoorDash or my,
or even CDL. This was an example of a CDL. Basically, these communities, they're transferring licenses.
So if you're transferring, that's when somebody really has to look at, does this person look like this person? Like we have certainly seen that in some of the crime rings where they will go after a specific demographic that, maybe people aren't looking closely enough at, do you match this picture? And I think that's where the intelligence is. Now, if somebody is handing over a real license that is not them, nobody can detect that, right? That just requires somebody saying, you don't look like this person, and then going on to the next step. But, I think the first step is, let's see if this is real. Second
with
step,
GLP-1s,
you look like the person.
Harder and harder, because people look different. You've seen, I mean, I've lost 50 pounds on a GLP-1. I mean, because I don't have hair. I look largely the same.
Yeah, but if you had hair and were 60 pounds heavier, you wouldn't look like your idea at all. Yeah.
Like if I did a hair transplant.
Yeah.
Hey, I did do a bet that if spot rates didn't hit because I knew they were going to hit a record, that I would go to Turkey. My wife was against that, by the way. She hated that I offered that up. All of a sudden come back with a full head of hair.
I don't want to cover the show for that long while you heal.
That's true. Probably would not be a great look. Brian, I got to ask
But I will
question.
say one quick thing, though, is since so many of these people are hired remotely, now it doesn't matter if you lost 50 pounds or you lost your hair, right? Facial recognition, biometrics will measure the vectors on your face, and we can tell if it's you or not. And since a lot of times people are sort of hired remotely, we can handle that because we can remotely validate the license and then also validate from that license picture that you're the guy holding it and that you match the picture.
So, Brian, we have a wide variety of folks that tune into the show. Many of them are not truck drivers. They're worried about their identity as just a normal person. What advice would you have for your family members in terms of how they can protect themselves best? Is there a couple of things that are just easy to do that can help keep people safe?
Yeah, I'd say lock down your credit, because now it's easy to turn it on and off. Now, that's not going to stop. One of the main ways that people will steal your identity is they know where you have accounts, and they'll walk into the store and say, oh, I forgot my credit card, but I want to buy this. Now, it won't stop that, but it will stop things like the amount of cars bought under stolen identities is amazing. The amount of houses sold under identity theft is amazing. But if you lock your credit down, then you can protect that. Now, the other thing, too, is get a free credit monitoring service. Just watch what's going on, because, 15 million Americans, $30+ billion a year purely on identity theft last year. That's the consumer side of it. That's not the business side of it. So the main thing you can do, lock down what you have and monitor what is happening to your name and your credit. And most importantly, do it for your children, because they attack kids and old people more. Kids are easy because nobody thinks about them. And you wouldn't realize it until, 3 months from now, you got a huge credit card bill for your, 16-year-old.
That's crazy. It's scary. And I think about AI.
I worry about my parents more than anything, honestly.
You worry about your parents?
Yeah, getting, somehow.
Older people. Well, that seems to be one of the most vulnerable populations are older people who are not as in tune with some of the technology, or you talk to the people where their parents watched the first AI video and don't realize it's AI. That's, we all have people in our family that we know that just are like, this isn't real. And you're like, come on.
Well, and it's getting more and more sophisticated. Like my daughter, knows not to reply to a text if it's not from somebody she doesn't know.
I think everyone needs a code word that only you and your wife knows, so that
100%. But my family has one of those words, and they're getting so sophisticated. The amount of things that come in supposedly from me to employees in my company, and we train on that all the time. But it is so realistic.
Yeah, I'm sending you messages.
I get 10 a day asking, no, not to wire money, asking to confirm my cell phone number.
Oh, well, there was one, we had an incident, this is years ago.
But they're very polite. They're very.
FreightWaves, I know, and if it's super polite, because I'm so direct. But we had a situation years ago on FreightWaves TV. We had a young producer. She had just started. She was moving from Florida She reported me to HR for harassing her for not going to Walgreens and buying gift cards. And HR reaches out to me and said, hey, we got this formal complaint about you harassing her on her home time on vacation because she refused to go to Walgreens on her time off. And I'm like, that wasn't me. But it sounded so like me that she didn't know the difference.
Yeah, and the things and just tell your whole families, right? The things to look out for are sense of urgency, right? They try and make you feel like it has to be done now. This is so important, right? Nothing has to be done now. But that's what they're going to do. One of the biggest things the bad guys do is make you feel like if you don't do it now, something bad's really going to happen, right? So they prey on human instinct, right? And that's why I think these folks are really kind of animals. They are not, they want your money and they're going to do anything they can do to get it. Things that come into you are going to look very, very realistic. It's going to have a sense of urgency and they're going to want it fast. And, and people fall prey to that.
And AI is making it so easy to sound like someone or looks like someone. And you got to have, I think the only defense there, read stories, I think the Journal had a story not too long ago about a father who thought his daughter was kidnapped and he was on the way to the bank to do a big withdrawal. And it just so happened that he was told not to contact anybody. They're monitoring his cell phone. And I think his wife called and she's like, no, I just got off the phone with the daughter. And it turned out to be a complete scam. He was completely unaware. He was in panic. That's the scary part. The only way you're going to know is just have a secret word. My wife and I had a secret word, and I was telling my wife we were doing this. She tells her best friend, I'm like, there's a reason it's a secret.
Not a secret anymore.
So I hope
don't say it in front of your
it because
kids
she
either,
might struggle.
They'll,
But that's, social
and the scariest thing too, when you talk about AI, it's making it so it's much faster and easier. So the volume of this stuff, like it used to be, everybody knows about, the Nigerian call centers, where they're calling up and pretending to be something. But, that meant one person making one phone call. With AI, and the amount of information we've put out on social media about ourselves, people can copy you. AI can do it. And it allows them, instead of doing 60 calls in an hour, they can do 6,000. So that's what is really, I think, ramping up a lot of this fraud.
Bryan, you do give me anxiety, unfortunately. All of this gives me anxiety. I appreciate you coming on. It's very similar to what Brandon Freed with the Air Forwarders Association. After September 11, there was always a view that, the statement is the terrorists only have to be right once. They have to be right 100% of the time. The same thing as an identity theft. It only takes one vulnerability, one incident. In a business, it takes one person at a controller or somebody in accounting doing something. That's where a lot of this is coming. It's all social engineering. Some of the biggest hacks have been done because someone was trying to your point, trying to cooperate or thought they were doing the right thing and they made a mistake. One inversion and all of a sudden it ends up exposing everybody. Just absolutely scary and quite frightening.
Correct. So be vigilant is all I can say.
Be vigilant.
Well, Bryan, we'd love to have you back to keep us up to date. Congratulations
Anytime.
on your success.
My pleasure.
Doing everything you can to keep us safe. And speaking of keeping us safe, we'll be back with the Chief Strategy Officer at E2 Open to talk about what they're doing to keep our supply chain safe.
In today's freight environment, every second of uptime matters. Of course, maintenance is inevitable, but large fleets cannot succeed on reactive fixes alone. That's why Love's Truck Care delivers smarter preventative maintenance. Love's understands that operational pressures demand a nationwide service network for better visibility, actionable intelligence, and consistent execution, all of which you protect your assets, reduce your total cost of ownership, and maximize your uptime. Maintenance is, of course, inevitable, but large fleets cannot succeed on reactive fixes alone. That's why Love's Truck Care delivers smarter preventative maintenance. Learn more.
Race car drivers like NASCAR champion Jesús are a lot like commercial drivers, pros. But even the best in the world still watch the tape to see what they missed and get better next time. So we created the Samsara Driving Coach,
Great race, Jesse, but you were following too closely and you were speeding.
Okay, you got me on that one.
Samsara uses insights from millions of professional drivers to coach drivers in real time.
Because even champions need a coach.
Give me the keys.
The super successful people are part of the 1%. They're part of that very, very small percentage. That's why I don't want you to do things that everybody's doing. I want you to do the small things that nobody else is doing. The people that are most successful in this business treat it like it's the only thing that's bringing income into their household. If you do that, then you'll have the same results. These people operate like they have no other chance. They have nothing else going. This is the only breadwinner that they have in play. I'm Adam Wingfield, and this is the FreightWaves Playbook. Become part of the 1%. Sign up for FreightWaves Playbook today.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Today. We have Pawan Joshi. He's with E2 Open. He's the Chief Strategy Officer there. Part of WiseTech. I don't know that people understand the scale of E2 Open, but you guys deal with over 6,000 shippers, something like 9 of the 10 top food companies in the world. You guys are all over the place, really representative of the global supply chain. Pawan, lots of fraud is taking place across the industry. How are you guys helping customers deal with it?
Craig, Julie, great to be on. There's a lot of stuff going on, and I think our supply chains are very much stretched these days and stretched at an international global scale, right? So it's I was listening to your earlier caller here. It's not just about securing inside your four walls. It's really about going multiple tiers deep in your supply chain around manufacturing as well as distribution, right? That's where the fraud can come in. You see a lot of activity happening around things that are going. The wrong people, wrong actors, picking up stuff, getting into the wrong places and disappearing away. It starts off, first of all, by understanding, where and who you depend on and making sure that everybody has the same level of understanding of security, not just in terms of, systems, but more importantly, in terms of the operations. And, in this day and age when operations are so stretched out at an international scale, that's the problem at hand. And that's really what every single supply chain is actually dealing with these days. If you take a step back, what do we do? I think for us, it's really putting together a platform on which our customers can run their supply chain. That platform is built in a manner that allows participants of their supply chain across multiple tiers, whether it's around manufacturing, around distribution, around logistics, around fulfillment, all to be securely logging into the platform to see the single version of the truth, act on it, and move out of it. So security really starts out with understanding the process, understanding the role that an individual plays in the process of delivering products and services to the market, and then being able to run that role and play that role in a very secure fashion. And that's really what we've been doing for the last 25, 30 years or so.
So in talking about these agile multi-party supply chains and how much of that infrastructure is being exploited, and you talked about how quickly that moves and how thin everyone is stretched, can you give us some examples of how that's being exploited currently and then how the system you just discussed can help combat that?
Yeah, so I think at the scale that if you want to think about it, right, a lot of systems that are running on-prem that customers rely on, and the partners rely on are not necessarily secure, and they're not secure not because people didn't want them to be secure. It's just that they've not been updated over many years, in some cases even decades, right? And they're systems that run so people don't touch them. It's really, and in some cases people have forgotten about all the other band-aids that have been put around it. So there is that level of vulnerability. There is a traditional vulnerability of phishing scams and some of these things where even if systems are up to date, understanding and securing those systems and making sure people that are accessing them have awareness of what needs to be done is super important. Now, all these things, will continue to happen, right? Bad actors will try to do all these kind of things. The important thing really here is to be able to detect when something nefarious has happened and be able to react to that. And the only way to do that is to be able to look at activities that are happening as a part of the continuum, right? So if a truck disappears, that's carrying critical components to a factory, then being able to understand that truck is no longer being tracked. And if it's no longer being tracked, not only understand how you go recover, that material that has disappeared, but more importantly, from a continuity of supply standpoint, be able to replan what happens when the truck doesn't show up in time, right? So these are really ways in which you have to look at the operations, understand, security and these vulnerabilities will continue to happen, detect when something nefarious happens, and basically start off a two-step process. One step is to go figure out, and investigate. On the other hand, make sure that you are actually dealing with the potential disruptions that could happen, as some of these unplanned events or bad actors have, execute some of these things. And that's really the power of the platform, being able to look at those activities in context and being able to trigger some of those exceptions, not just to resolve, shortages, but also to be able to trigger investigations.
Now, Pawan, one of the most effective things or the best rule, it's sort of like if you watch the shows, the Dateline, is the first 24 hours makes a difference. The same thing in supply chain. When freight gets stolen, because this stuff gets liquidated and fenced so quickly, these are organized crimes, they have networks to be able to distribute the product and liquidate it really quickly. Time is of the essence. One of the big challenges is that shippers oftentimes don't realize fast enough that their cargo has been stolen or has gone missing. How are you guys helping shippers address that problem?
Yeah, so you talked about cargo missing, right? It's essentially being able to track shipments that are in transit, which is where most of the things happen, right? Pick up and drop off locations, depots, any place where modes get interchanged or, goods get handed over from one party to the other as you're moving in transit. It is really that handover takeover that has to be monitored. And it has to be monitored, as you rightly pointed out, with a very, very small event horizon. So if you're not able to figure out what the status of that handover is, or the status of that truck is as it is moving through, being able to highlight that in context is super important, and that's really what we do. You talked about 6,000 shippers, 6,000 carriers that we have on the land side in North America. We also track a big chunk of ocean freight that's moving in, a big chunk of air freight that's moving in, and we do that through not just the ocean carriers and the air carriers and the road carriers and the rail carriers. We also track vessels as they're moving through in different places. So being able to triangulate not just what the carrier is reporting, not just what the sensor is reporting, but also being able to triangulate across the board allows us to provide our shippers the context of not just where the freight is, but if that freight begins to move in the wrong direction, be able to take that corrective action as soon as possible. And not just notify the shippers, but also notify the carriers, the forwarders, anybody who is actually associated with that freight moving, including the suppliers who actually could potentially own the freight at that particular point in time.
Yeah, they're all looking for the weakest link. You also have a big rail platform, or really the sort of intersection of the drayage and what happens at the intermodal port and the port of recipient in the U.S. One of the stories that we had not too long ago, it's on trains.com, is the idea that these criminal syndicates in Southern California are jumping on moving trains. And they're actually attacking the train that's moving down. I just think that's, first of all, it's absolutely insane. It feels like a movie. But, I mean, ultimately, you're a couple of days before you even realize it. How are customers supposed to handle those types of thefts? Is it a matter of tracking the actual boxes? Is it a matter of looking for when the seal has been broken? Like, what are the things that shippers can do for those moving cargo transits?
It's a combination of all of these, right? At the bare minimum, you want to have seals that actually are active, not just seals that are passive, but seals if they're broken can send signals out. I mean, the amount of connectivity that we have now in the world, there's no reason why we can't have intelligent active seals that once they're broken, they notify somebody. The same thing is in terms of containers, right? Containers actually having sensors. In many cases, even the product that is moving having sensors that actually track the movement of those, whether it be around temperature changes, if you're doing moving refrigerated goods, or shock sensors, or any of that stuff. There's a lot of intelligence and a lot of active sensors that can be mounted on that. The question really at the end of the day becomes, what's the cost benefit of that? It makes absolute sense when you're moving high value cargo to have a lot of these active things in the mix that prevent theft. But there is also low tech that we can bring in, or low value, low cost things that we can also support, right? Which is basically being able to say, if a container is not at its destination or location at a certain point in time, what happens? Being able to track the container rail car combination in the example that you gave and see whether that rail car and the container is still on that or not. There are a lot of things that can be handled, not just at the individual pallet or individual product level, but at the container or shipment container level. And at the end of the day, it does sound like a really old Western movie where, people are jumping on trains and, taking carriages and wagons away. But it is happening. The value of goods that are moving across our borders is getting higher and higher. We're relying on globalization for a lot of these things, and a lot of high value stuff moves around across international ports. And there's a lot of handover takeover that happens, which exposes the opportunity for bad actors to come in and take advantage of these things.
Yeah, that's where we talked about it earlier, this new legislation that's in Congress that needs to get passed is to actually give Homeland Security some funding to go after these bad actors. It's absolutely a plague on society and a plague on commerce, and these shippers are just so vulnerable. I was thinking back when we were in Las Vegas at the Samsara. I know, it's still an old habit, dies hard. The Samsara, I remember Pirates. Speaking of bad actors, pirates are good, not good actors, but Samsara is an event where they had the labels, the smart labels that you can put on these shipments. I mean, these are basically 45-day batteries.
Paper.
That are essentially paper, and you would never even know it, that do provide the visibility that companies need.
Yeah.
And I think those are the types of technologies of really implemented inside your supply chain that makes it really powerful.
100%. And I think it serves two purposes, right? It definitely is on the security side, it serves a purpose, but it also allows you to track your material as it is moving at a much higher fidelity. And you think about, even if nothing bad happens, knowing where your stuff is and being able to react to it in terms of, what the impact on the origin and destination is super important, right? That's at the end of the day, the critical parts of the supply chain. Assuming everybody is doing good, if your shipment is running on time, and at the destination, you're short of inventory because your product did really well, you want to know where that particular moving shipment is. And if you can deconsolidate it, expedite it at the next deconsolidation point, that gives you an opportunity to actually think about a revenue upside. And those are the kind of things that you want to actually invest in, not just from a security perspective, but the fact that you really know with a high degree of confidence where that material is moving allows you to actually open up opportunities in terms of revenue generation or even cost attainment. And I think that's really where the future of supply chain is. At the end of the day, regardless, you actually need to have and operate on a connected process across multiple parties, because that's really what our supply chains are these days.
We've talked a lot about visibility. What other risks and vulnerabilities do you think there are that we're not talking enough about?
I think some of these things also have to do with how products are designed and how supply chains are architected, right? We've kind of assumed that the way the supply chains have worked, in a relatively quiet, stable period, I would say over the last 50-ish years or so, is what the norm is going to be. But that's not the case, right? As products and product designs are getting more and more complex, as some of these products that are moving at international borders get more and more valuable, and the geopolitical dynamics changes, it opens up opportunities for disruptions. And I think that's really at the back of it what we need to think about. There are things like, being able to design products intelligently where if they actually fall into the wrong hands, you cannot use those products, right? And we can do that in some of the high value assets that are moving through our supply chains. There's that. I think there's better screening of, nodes through which products move. Certain ports, certain regions, certain depots are not that good from a security standpoint. Understanding that as a part of your supply chain design is super important. Continuously scanning for and managing compliance around actors that you're relying on to run your supply chain and rely on to move products in your supply chain. Being able to screen them on a 24/7 basis, being able to look at what the ownership structure looks like. Those are all things that we tend to work in an offline fashion that have to become online. Like, kind of goes back to the point, Craig, you were making. When something bad happens, the aperture that you have to actually detect that and react to that is getting smaller and smaller because the bad actors are getting more and more sophisticated in their operation. So being able to understand the risk that any one of your supply chain exposes is super important, and being able to understand that because these risks are very, very fast moving throughout different nodes in the supply chain.
Oh, and we got to ask this because our audience wants to know, state of freight today. There's a lot of conversation about capacity going away and the capacity crunching. We see it all over that rates are going up, but a lot of it's driven by capacity. The question is, what's up with the volume? You guys have a very large perspective across the freight market. How are customers feeling right now about their volumes?
I think there is a lot of uncertainty that's going on, and probably will continue to be from if you think about it from a global scale, just because of the geopolitical nature of it. But also, we look at different parts of the world. Different economies are doing better than others. There's a big disruption that happened, with all the oil disruptions in the Gulf and the Middle East. So these are all things that are actually putting pressure on capacity across the board, right? And really the capacity is a function of price, right? At what price point can you actually move freight around? And it's the price of the infrastructure, it's the price of the fuel that is really being at the bottom of some of these constraints that we're seeing on capacity. I think from a volume standpoint, we are not seeing that big of a dramatic shift that's happening. I think it's some of these disruptions in macroeconomic and geopolitical conditions that are putting pressure on it. I think we will see a new stable thing emerge. As soon as you say a new stable thing, something new is going to happen. Stability is going to move over. But I think at the end of the day, the dynamic nature of supply chain is becoming even more dynamic than we ever thought it would, right? And these are in many cases not because of supply chain reasons; they're because of non-supply chain reasons that affect supply chain.
That's a great point, Pawan. I mean, how did you create, I got asked this when we founded FreightWaves, how do you create a media network that covers the news of supply chain that seems so boring, nothing ever happens? We know that's not true. We know how dynamic, it feels like more and more is happening. Every single week, every single day, something new is disruptive. It's unfortunately disrupts everybody, but fortunately keeps us in business.
I 100% agree. I think that's why I think the important thing really is to be able to understand what's happening in the world and how can you actually make yourself resilient to it. It's not that disruptions are not going to happen. The question really here is how do you actually make sure when disruptions happen, you can detect them as early as possible and be ready to react to it, right? And whether it be because of bad actors stealing goods in your supply chain, or could be just because any other disruption happens in your supply chain, whether it be weather, whether it be a geopolitical condition, or for that matter, even quality and traditional supply chain issues, right? But at the end of the day, resiliency is the reason why supply chains will continue to work. That's the reason why you and I are doing what we do, because that's complex business.
It's job security. Pawan, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, as our audience, for being here with us today. We're just never shortage of things to talk about.
We've got a great show tomorrow. We've got Tony Urban from Cass. We've got Michelle Livingstone. We've got John Kingston to talk about oil.
That's a heck of a lineup. Michelle was at Home Depot. Cass sees so many freight bills. It's a packed week. And then we're going to talk oil. Tomorrow is the EIA DOE index that comes out every single Tuesday. We'll hear what John Kingston has to say about the oil market tomorrow.